Oh, I never thought I'd say this, but I'm definitely gonna do more. I thought I would stop at Iron Form on Grendel, but nope. Since I'm bored AF. That, and I'm probably a little bit cuckoo dead. I'll form everything, even some of the weaker weapons. Which, contrary to what you may think, is actually gonna my final weapon for you today is gonna surprise you. And if you saw the title, yeah, you're not gonna be surprised too much, but you're probably just gonna be seeing that title and thinking, oh, pretty garbo already. But you'd be shocked. Anyways, so first up for today. Do I hear tail wriggle? What do you say? It's hammer time? Oh, what? Perfect. Really perfect guessing. Because we've got the Volnus. Now, this was introduced when Plains of Island launched with Gara, and stat-wise, it was pretty good. Fairly okay crit chance for the time when Blood Rush was one of the had a bigger multiplier and relied on modded crit chance, so it could benefit from that. And then, not to mention, it had an extremely high status chance, so it could easily cash in on the fact that its damage was more tilted towards slash. And you'd be surprised that this thing can hold its own even to this day. Now, because of its low crit chance of 18%, I'm not going to do a heavy attack setup. And also, I won't be showing off my Riven this time because it's a bit meh. It's like, I could think of a bunch of other things to put on here, and I'm definitely gonna re-roll this a whole bunch more times. So, for the build, we've got Organ Shadow for crit damage. When compared with Blood Rush, it won't be very good right off the bat at first, but this is a cold start in the Simulacrum, and when I did my tests earlier, this was doing really good. We have Drifting Content for combo duration and status chance. Then we have Condition Overload, as our status procs start to accumulate, we get more base damage, so better than Prime Pressure Point, especially in the case of the Volnus. Then we have Virulent Scourge and Vicious Frost for viral damage. Now, you could easily swap this for Corrosive, and it would do just as well. Sorry, holding back a burp. For attack speed, we got Prime Fury, because Volnus is pretty fast as it is. So, you wouldn't need Berserker for this. And finally, just because I have the capacity, what would normally be my Riven, I decided to swap Primed Reach. This is one of the things I would like to put on my Riven, because this has attack speed. I know someone mentioned that on the video involving my Dakar Prime that I find it mandatory. I apologize and I goofed up about that. Basically, what I was trying to point out was when you build your weapon, if you have a Riven in mind, try and get stats for that Riven that can replace a mod from your build. For example, on this Volnus Riven here, it's got attack speed with the addition of finishing damage, but minus damage to Grineer. So, in this example, you could take out Prime Fury, put Prime Reach where it was, and then just put my Riven there. It's faster, and pretty much no realistic loss except for that minus damage to Grineer. And if you get a finisher, it will hit like a bloody truck. So let's get Prime Fury back. So that's pretty much what it boils down to. My mentality for Rivens is if they've got a strong disposition like this, then I always go for a stat that can replace a mod on its build. So you can be more flexible with your builds. So like, say for instance, if this was back in the days when Prime Pressure Points was a thing, this was sort of what you would expect from a Volnus build. Whereas if you had a Riven that had, say, melee damage and Prime Fury's attack speed, having both of those, you could easily take one of them out and add something like Prime Reach, without so much as a single loss in your damage output. Nowadays, that's not as much of a case because prime pressure point, but anyways, point stands. If you get a mod with a Riven mod with stats that can replace up to 2 of the mods on your build, that is what I personally aim for, and it would be really good for anyone to aim for, because that means you're more flexible, and you could add something like, let's add primed reach, you could add more status chance by another dual stat, you could go with an extra crit damage from Gladiator Might, more attack speed from Gladiator Vice or Berserker, more combo duration from body count. Or you can even, if you've got the capacity, you can even add Sacrificial Steel. When maxed out, it'll boost its crit chance to 57.6. Now, while Blood Rush doesn't boost crit chance that is modded, Sacrificial Steel will give you a head start on the critical ramp up. So, take with that what you will. You mod it how you like. I just say that this build worked really well for me. So, before I go and drag this out anymore, let's test this out. I've put one bombard here because, well, I kind of got a little bit annoyed with trying to hit multiple at the same time. Now again, this is a cold start in the simulacrum, so it's not good. This is sort of what would look like early on if you were to start a mission right from with enemies being at level 165 onwards, which is next to impossible. And he died just while I slipped off the map. So, when it comes to the Volnus, is it still worth picking up, even after the melee 3% change? I could give it a big thumbs up in that regard. And Grendel Blues. Anyways, the second one, I'm split down the middle whether I want to use its Syndicate variant or I want to use its base variant. Because one thing that would make me use the base variant of this next weapon over the Syndicate variant is the base can be built for heavy attacks, but the Syndicate can't. But when it comes to heavy attacks, I don't try and bias myself over that because, meta changes. And I like to do light attack builds, because if it can handle light attack builds while having the stats for heavy attacks, stats for heavy attacks is just icing on the cake for me. So if we flick... the weapon in question is the Heliocor. This was introduced way back. Now, a lot of people use Helios, which is understandable. It's just free codex scans wherever you can, like, for any codex entries you may be missing. Now, when it comes to the Synoid Heliocor and the normal Heliocor, there was a few things I've noticed when it comes to the damage output. The Synoid Heliocor is faster in attack speed, so it ramps up a lot quicker in terms of getting its damage output ramped up. Well, sorry, I should restate that. They seemed to have a similar pacing for ramping up, but it's done differently. The normal Heliocor has... what it has going for it is that you've got significantly higher crit chance, almost double it, same crit multiplier, and less status chance, but it's got slower attack speed than the Synoid Heliocor. So if you want to get a very good attack speed out of this, you either need a very strong Riven with attack speed, or you have to combine Berserker with maybe Gladiator Vice for extra crit chance. But that is me. I personally like to have a little bit of attack speed and consistency. So take with that what you will. You may be different. I'm just putting my opinions. Now, I'll show the Synoid Heliocor because I was using this during Railjack and it was doing very well. Build-wise, we have Blood Rush and Condition Overload, which are mandatory for, I'm gonna say, any melee weapon with a crit chance just above 10%, which may seem a little bit lowballing to some others, but I personally find that having it that low is like, it may not give consistent crits, but every time it does crit, it is really handy. Also, sorry if you heard that, that's my auto bug sprayer going off. So, and for my Riven here, we've got Heliocor Decivisicon. Not my ideal Riven, but it does help with the Synoid Heliocor. I don't have it on the normal Heliocor, but nonetheless, I could think of a bunch of other stats to put on this, and I'm gonna re-roll this, because the Heliocor has one cool mechanic to it that I have not seen people use the Heliocor lately, and I find that's not doing it justice. And I'll explain why in a sec. Because for the Riven, we've got damage to Grineer, melee damage, and status duration. All pluses. So, essentially I've got a discount pressure point on here. With some extra, essentially, Smite Grineer, and what was the status duration on? I have already forgotten. Oh. Yeah, just a slightly, a little worse lasting sting. I should have just scrolled over to that. Whoops. Sorry. For attack speed, we got Prime Fury, which is... for some it might be a little bit slow to use Prime Fury, even on the Synoid Heliocor, but that does not mean it's like you're stuck with Prime Fury. You can always go Berserker, but it just means you might have that inconsistent start, like, ramp up time for attack speed. Which, for the Synoid Heliocor, I found having Prime Fury in it was just fine. For crit damage, we've got Organ Shatter, and our duration status chance, I always use Drifting Contact no matter... It's fairly cheap to use. You don't need to put a former on it for something like body count, and other alternative you could probably use is Gladiator Rush. You get less combo duration, but you get extra crit chance stacked from the mini Blood Rush effect the Gladiator set has. So you can use that, and if your Riven happens to have two different stats on it that can, much like in the same vein as any other Riven, I would highly suggest. One of the mods I would easily swap out would be something like Prime Range, because now that it gives a flat range bonus, you could get some good wave clear out of these. So, and finally, we've got Virulent Scourge and Voltaic Strike for corrosive damage. Now, this doesn't have an awful lot of slash, so I wouldn't go viral in this case, but because these two dual stats and Drifting Contact are giving us 100% status chance, we're getting consistent corrosive procs. So Condition Overload has plenty to feed off of. Oh, and also before I go to the build, like the testing, sorry. If I were to swap this for my Riven for anything, I could safely say right now there are a few options. And you could lose a Forma for this. So you don't need to do 4 Forma, you could do 3 with this build. So swap this Riven. You might need an Umbral Forma if I'm thinking. Because, yeah, actually you will. Wait a minute. What am I saying? No, 11 capacity. You could easily take away this and throw in Sacrificial Steel, and you'd have a quick start. Heck, I could even do that right now. While it takes away all my capacity, this is sort of what I would use for the Synoid Heliocor. Gives you a faster ramp up with a head start on ramping up your crits. So, and Blood Rush will eventually take you into orange crit territory. So, for the sake of testing, let's do this. Let's do this one first. And that's another thing I like about the Synoid Heliocor. With the changes to melee, they gave the Synoid Heliocor an initial combo. So you have a head start there. So if we flick our test dummy, Billy the Bomber. See? It's a fairly fast attack speed. So you got that. Now, one thing is, again, it's the cold stun Sinatra, so I gotta get a combo going. But once the corrosive procs start to ramp up, can see here, you already notice it's doing some very good. It was doing some very good damage there, and here we go. Now, the Synoid Heliocor, compared to its normal one, especially if you modded the normal variant for heavy attacks, it's pretty weak as a cold start. This thing can easily handle 50 to 60 right off the bat. From what I've seen, I've not tested every scenario, but I'm pretty sure this could go as high as 80 from a cold start and still be fine. As for its unique mechanic, it's pretty much what the Helios does. If you smack I need to see. Sorry, I'm a little tired. It's like 1:30 in the morning, but when it comes to the Heliocor series, they have this fun mechanic where you can scan enemies you kill into the codex, which, if you don't like using Helios, because I personally use the Smita Kavat as the UI here shows. When it comes to me, I personally like to use Kavats, Kubros, or anything like that, because they are easy to revive, whereas the Sentinels, they go down very quickly, especially in higher levels. Whereas my Kavat will go down, and I got a minute to revive it. So, pretty solid there. It's like, it goes down in a survival run for endurance. I could just swoop over, pop into my operator, go invisible, and then revive my Kavat. So, that's pretty much my selling point for using anything other than Sentinels. While I'm not dissing anyone who does use Sentinels, it's just my personal way of playing. So, with the Heliocor, is Synoid worth picking up? I'd still say yes, because it's fairly low mastery. I think when they let's see, Synoid Heliocor. Oops, my typing is off today. Because I remember correctly, the Synoid Heliocor's mastery rank lock was dropped. Yeah, oh no, it was increased. So for a mastery rank 11 weapon, not really worth picking up. But for the fact that its unique mechanic gives the codex, it gives you entries into your codex by just smashing it, then it won't work on things like Eidolons or high level bosses. But cannon fodder or new enemies, like for instance, say you were playing at the time the War Within was released, you could just bring the Heliocor or the Synoid Heliocor, smash some enemies' faces in, and you gradually fill your codex. So the Heliocor series has that going for it. Also, I feel I should mention the stats of the normal Heliocor, because it's basically a discount Fragor Prime, because when compared to the Fragor Prime, it's got only 2% less status chance. It has an average crit multiplier, but it's slightly faster, and it has initial combo count, so it has a head start. Has slightly less range and less status chance, but the damage is pretty much even in terms of numbers, with the Heliocor being more tilted towards impact than the Fragor Prime being more balanced. So, in all comparisons, both weapons are pretty much evenly matched. So, if you want to build a heavy attack for the Heliocor, that will work perfectly on this. 38% crit chance, and with my build on this one, which is pretty much just built with condition, with Gladiator Might added, because again, I like to focus on light attacks rather than heavy attacks, with some exceptions like the Redeemer Prime. And before I go, now, if you actually read the title all the way to the end, you'll see that, well, you're gonna think I'm just gonna be out of my frickin' mind. The Plasma Sword. I honestly didn't expect much from this. Even though I like to use non-meta weapons, and I gave the Plasma Sword an honest-to-goodness go. It's unranked now, but it's got 4 form on this thing. yes, I know it's not something, but in terms of something that could help it, a Riven is cannot go unnoticed, because by itself, you would, if I were to take my Riven off and put on something like Condition Overload, which I can't in this case because I don't have. Wait, do I? Oh, I do. Pardon me. You've actually got a fairly solid build, because now that Prime Pressure Point is no longer mandatory on a melee weapon, the Plasma Sword is still a fairly good weapon. I was testing it with my Riven earlier, but that was because it was adding... Yeah, it had a slow ramp up, but once Berserker starts kicking in, you see I can safely say the Plasma Sword can be a very good competitor for something like the Dactyr Prime, or some of the higher end swords. That was 165 with the Plasma Sword. Of all melee weapons, of all the single swords, the Plasma Sword is competing with the Dactyr Prime from my spot. It's fairly cheap to get, because you can get it from alerts, for crying out loud. And its Mastery Rank block is at 4. You can get the Plasma Sword early on. It has okay stats. Now that it's got IPS, a viral and slash setup is great on this. And if you get if you use something like my Riven, which adds flat range like Primed Reach, now granted I don't have Condition Overload on here, but I was testing this without it. It's still decimated. So you can easily... What? And let me put my money where my mouth is before I go into the Emerald. It's a little bit slow, but you see, it's very quick to ramp up. So it's essentially as if you were just building with Prime Pressure Point in mind rather than Condition Overload. In my case, I feel the Condition Overload build would be stronger, but I still have to re-roll my Riven, and I'm not going to see... It's going to take a lot. Raw damage and range, that's something I can't really dismiss. But still, Plasma Sword, 165 Bombard, it's still shredded. My point being, for those who diss the Plasma Sword, you've got to really check yourself, because the Plasma Sword is now a beast. I mean, granted, it's got a ways to compete with things like Dactyr Prime, but it boils down to this. Dactyr Prime's vaulted, this isn't. You can easily get this from alerts. Well, not from alerts, but Nightwave. Nightwave, this thing, piece of cake to get, cheap to craft, and if you got the mods and the Forma, you can easily get a solid sword out of something that's dirt cheap. So, Plasma Sword, worth picking up, especially with Reality 3.0? Yes. It's like, if you have Dactyr Prime, it might be a bit redundant by comparison, but with the Plasma Sword having an extremely high Riven disposition, like at 5 blips, I'm not sure if it's exact multiplier, you can get some very strong Rivens. I mean, you saw my Riven earlier. It had 200%, 211% melee damage, and 2.8 meters of range added. So when it comes to Rivens, the Plasma Sword will really benefit, especially if you've got something like attack speed and range. So attack speed, range, you get wave clear, you get a super fast attack speed sword. Like, this thing will compete with Dactyr Prime in that case. So, one final thing to do before I end this off. Spawn multiple biddies, because Grendel, after all that work, is hungry. Get my belly. Yeah. Oh, that satisfied groan. Not groan. That's satisfied voice. Oh, I always forget that belly jiggles. Oh, good for a laugh. Guys, thank you very much for watching. I'm slowly nearing the end of all the non-meta melee, so expect me to do my videos to start tilting towards the meta as I start to run out. So, yeah, thank you very much for watching, and with a big old yaw yeet, I say goodbye.